Alrighty. Thank you for joining us today. This is the second episode of the Thought Leadership series presented by Dynasource. And we are talking about the IT services industry today. And we have Dana who is going to do a presentation on this topic. And then we'll take any questions from the audience or any questions that we see online. And just very briefly, my name is Keisha Jackson. I work at Microsoft in the One Commercial Partner organization. And I'm the digital strategy lead for Microsoft Partner Community, which is the digital partner community sponsored from the corporate organization focused on partner to partner connections. And this series is one way that we amplify partners who are doing great work and doing more across the globe for everyone. So with that, I will turn it over to Dana.
Well, thanks very much, Keisha, and hello, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, I guess, depending on where in the world this podcast finds you. My name is Dana Wilmer. I have been active in the Microsoft ecosystem for the last decade now, doing a lot of project work for Microsoft around cloud transition. Probably most notably have developed a number of collateral assets as part of the SureStep program, financial models, things like that, as well as have worked extensively with partners directly in a one-on-one consulting capacity, really around the world. So what I'd really like to do in the next 20 minutes or so is share with you some of the perspectives and opinions that I've formed over the last 10 years in this ecosystem from largely the interactions that I've had with now hundreds of partners across really all segments of the ecosystem and around the world. And I would say also that my opinions and perspectives are formed as well by independent research that I have conducted and continue to conduct among partners really of all types and sizes, partners that I've developed relationships with. And I do this research because I am a business analyst and a financial analyst at heart. I spent the first decade of my career in the investment industry, and I really like to understand the financial forces that are in play and that impact partners as we all engage in our own digital transformation and the delivery of new solutions to customers. So with that, I'll sort of set the stage, if I could, with what J.B. Wood in his book, Consumption Economics, has described as the new rules of tech. Many of you will be familiar with that body of work. Those of you who haven't read it yet, I highly encourage it. I think it's a very valuable perspective. But really two things pop out of that for me. The first is his focus on business value and the need really for us as an ecosystem to focus on business value, delivering business value to customers. And I would say that, we're really almost no longer in the business of providing technology solutions per se, but in the business of providing business outcomes or business value to customers through technology. And that value, by the way, is to me defined by the customer, not as we sometimes might like to define it as an industry. And what this really means is that there is a transfer of risk underway as part of this whole digital transformation. Risk is being transferred from the customer to us as providers of business outcomes and business solutions more broadly. In the past, a customer would invest significant sums of money upfront in licenses and services, and really getting a return on that investment was up to them. They really now seek to transfer that risk to us as an ecosystem. And I would say that, in my opinion, the degree to which we are successful in that will determine the degree to which we experience the full benefit of our own digital transformation from a financial point of view, and we risk a commoditization of both our products and services if we don't sort of meet that test. Now, I mentioned that I'd done a lot of research independently, and I wanted to share with you some findings from research that I did earlier this year. In the spring, I have been tracking gross margin levels at the partner level for some time now. And I want to sort of call your attention to, first of all, the fact that, not all revenue streams are created equal. Different partners will have different combination of revenue streams, but not all of them have the same inherent potential to deliver margin to the partner. There's a certain progression, or really a step system that goes with that. And on the left, you have the highest margins typically available to partners from the delivery of their own IP, really productized knowledge or productized expertise. The bars in the middle, sort of in the 30 to 40% range in terms of gross margins from delivery of services. And then on the right, margins relative to the reselling of technology or hardware in one form or other. And one of the things that I'm really finding is that, particularly if we're talking about IT services, there is increasing pressure on the margins that partners are earning from the delivery of their professional services, particularly in a project sense. The customer, as I explained a few moments ago, really is increasingly reluctant to spend vast sums of money for technology projects up front. They, again, are seeking to transfer that risk, and that means that there's a revenue contraction from a partner perspective, often with respect to IT services. The people who we employ to deliver those services, IT professionals, don't want to take a pay cut, and so there is a certain amount of margin pressure that is being experienced by, I would say, pretty much all of the partners that I work with. Not to the same degree, but nonetheless, it's present pretty much across the board. Now, the other thing that I would call everyone's attention to is more on the operating expense side. And I've been tracking this now. I've done a lot of benchmarking in the partner ecosystem for really the last decade. And if you think about operating expenses as having four main buckets: sales, marketing, research and development, general administrative. As a percentage of revenue, what I'm finding these days is that the expenditure on sales as an activity as a percentage of revenue, and the expenditure on general administrative expenses as a percentage of revenue has remained roughly constant over time. What has changed, however, going the wrong way here. What has changed, however, is that partners are spending more on marketing than they have historically. When I first started measuring it, it was typically in the 1.5% to 2% of revenue range. Now it's significantly higher than that rather. And it's, of course, really, to me, a direct result of the change in buying behavior. Partners just have to spend more on marketing to be found now, because buyers want to control their buying process rather than be subjected to our sales process in a lot of ways. So marketing expenditures are up. And there's an increased level of expenditure on research and development, even outside the ISV community, as partners seek to put in place their own new offerings that are needed to, deliver digital transformation to customers. So the combination of these two things, margin pressure on services work, and an increased investment in marketing, in research and development, customer acquisition, is producing, generally speaking, a diminished level or a decreased level of profitability and a consequent cash flow squeeze. Now, this is not equal, for every partner. Some experience more, some have experienced it more than others, but it's prevalent pretty much across the ecosystem today in the work that I observe and what I see with partners that I'm working with. So turning to what this all means from an IT services perspective, I think it's helpful, first of all, to really delineate four different stakeholder groups. There's, first of all, the customers who buy IT services. There's, secondly, of course, the professionals who deliver those services to customers, the resellers that employ those professionals, and then the IT vendors and distributors who provide the products that the resellers and the professionals work with in building the solutions that are delivered to customers. And each of those different stakeholder groups, I'm finding, faces some rather unique challenges. And if we turn, first of all, to the customer, their reality really is that they often do not get the business outcomes out of the technology deployments that they were looking for. And if we define business value as existing in the eyes of the customer, that means that from their perspective, the project was a failure. We have failed to meet their expectations. And I would argue that one of the reasons that this exists, that there are these relatively high rate of IT project failures, is because the customers have no real visibility into the skill sets resident in the resellers and the professionals that they're engaging to deliver the technology solutions, to deliver the business solutions more broadly. They just don't have any way of understanding whether the skill sets that a particular reseller might have is exactly suited to the business outcome that they're trying to get out of their investment in the technology. So how do they come to those decisions? How do they decide who to work with? Well, in the digital age, it all starts with online research, but the challenge they face there is that their online research will really only surface those with the biggest marketing budgets, and they won't necessarily be the ones with the skills that are needed to deliver the business outcomes that the customer wants. And I would say that this is, particularly acute now because as partners spend more on marketing, that's a good thing. It's a necessary thing to respond to the change in buying behavior. But there is a certain critical mass in terms of what one needs to spend in order to get visibility in online searches, organic searches, and the like, which is in many cases still beyond the reach of many individual partners. So from a customer's perspective, their online research doesn't necessarily identify who is best suited to deliver the projects that they want to engage in. They also, as a customer, obviously tap into their professional networks, see who in their peer groups has had experiences with resellers, with technology providers. But the problem for the customer there is that often casts too narrow a net. Their professional networks are not necessarily big enough to identify all of the potential resellers or providers of technology solutions and business solutions more broadly. And then finally, they get information from salespeople, but that tends to be, the last place that they look. And, let's face it, salespeople have their own economic interests that they are pursuing. And so from a customer's perspective, they're not seen to be the most reliable of sources of information a lot of the time. And what this all results in, again, from the customer perspective, is that there is, as I said a moment ago, a fairly high rate of project failure. And if you think in terms of the total IT services spending, it's pegged by Gartner at about $1 trillion in 2018. A significant portion of that, from the customer's perspective, is at risk of not delivering valid business outcomes. In other words, the customer doesn't receive what they expected to or needed to in terms of the business impacts that they were seeking. And I would suggest that is something that should be of concern to all of us. Now, turning to the IT professional, there is certainly a rising wave of independent workers. I would say particularly in the more, industrialized economies. They are representative now of a significant portion of the workforce and a growing portion of the workforce. But from the customer perspective, they don't necessarily want to wade through all of those independent workers to find the professionals that are best suited to deliver their projects. They instead really outsource that to IT resellers. And from the IT resellers' perspective, the most common measure of an IT professional's value really is historically their day rate or their hourly rate. How much can I bill them out for as a reseller? And their utilization. How many billable hours or billable days can an individual professional really deliver to me over the course of a year? And I would suggest that they are, while important, certainly not trying to say they are not, they're an increasingly imperfect measure of the real value that a professional can deliver to the reseller, because that is often more determined by their domain expertise or their industry expertise that is needed to deliver the business outcomes that the customer is really seeking. Another challenge that the IT professional faces in the current sort of environment is that there's really a limited ability to premium price the professional's labor based on their skill sets, not necessarily so much technical certifications, but their business analysis skills, their ability to, their industry experience, their domain expertise. There's just a limited ability to premium price their labor on their skill sets, on their track record, or on their expertise. And what this results in is that from the perspective of the IT professional, it is very difficult for them to really adequately and fully frame the value that they deliver to resellers. And because of that, they really, in the long term, fail to realize their full economic potential in terms of the compensation that they might expect or receive, and also their professional potential in terms of the rate at which they advance through their career and really maximize the value that they derive from their career. If we think about the IT resellers' point of view, they, as I mentioned earlier, are often experiencing a drop in profitability and a dip in cash flow as the first real casualties of their own digital transformation in a cloud-first world. And they have a few mechanisms that they could use to mitigate that. Principally, they would be able to mitigate a dip in profitability and cash flow if they were better able to differentiate themselves. If they were, on the basis of that differentiation, better able to value price or price according to the business value that they were delivering as opposed to their cost of delivery, they would be able to, and often are to the degree they can do this, mitigate their drop in profitability and cash flow. But really, this requires that they are able to demonstrate to the customer their specific capabilities in terms of delivering the business outcomes that the customers want. And that's a very challenging thing for them to do a lot of the time, because the technical certifications and the other certifications that they have, their status in the Microsoft community, for instance, does not necessarily prove a gain to the customer, who in the final analysis, is in charge of making the decision as to whether the project goes forward or not, and what the project might be worth to the reseller. Technical and other certifications do not, from the perspective of the customer, necessarily prove that the reseller has the ability to deliver the business outcomes that the customer is really wanting and seeking, and thinks that they are going to get or believes they should get as a result of their investment in the project and in technology in general. And so the result of all of this from the IT reseller's point of view is that they continue to face increased margin pressure and a dip in cash flow. And this really requires, in a lot of cases, that they, because of the investments that they also have to make in terms of the digital transformation, I mentioned earlier, marketing, offering development, those kinds of things, they often need to inject capital into the business. And I can say from conversations with numerous owners, and understandably, this is something that is very challenging and very, very, very difficult for an owner to absorb. They built the business so that it provided an income to them, and now are needing to write checks to the business rather than have the business write them checks. It's a very uncomfortable situation, obviously, for owners to be in, or for the managers of IT resellers, because there's always that pressure from the owners. And then the last stakeholder group here, vendors and distributors of technology products, face the prospect that I would argue their success really is dependent upon how fast and how well their channels transform into the digital age. And, historically, they have typically focused more on the biggest of their resellers, in some cases the most vocal, But I think I would get little argument if I were to suggest that that does not necessarily guarantee their success going forward in an age of digital transformation. And I think the other challenge is that from the perspective of the IT vendor or distributor, the skill sets that are resident in their channels really effectively define and limit their addressable market. In other words, it is difficult for them to, if you will, have product pulled through their channels unless there is the skill sets at the delivery level resident in resellers and professionals to really take those products and wrap services around them to deliver the business outcomes that the customer is seeking. So because they have no visibility into reseller skill sets, they find that their addressable markets are often limited. And the other big problem that they face, I believe, is that, first of all, having a need to spend more on marketing and having to allocate leads, unless they're able to allocate them in a way that matches the lead with the reseller who has the professionals that's able to deliver the business outcomes that the customer wants, unless there's a mechanism to do that, which there isn't because there's really no visibility into those skill sets in a meaningful way, the lead allocation is of necessity random, and that means that the marketing investment is wasted much of the time. And what this all can result in is that the market share gains that the vendors and distributors are seeking and that they feel they should have often just do not materialize or do not materialize nearly as fast as is desired or as they think is possible or should happen. And this is something of a double jeopardy because if the vendor and the distributor does not get the market share that they feel they should have, it means that the competition has got that market share instead. And what we know in a subscription economy is that the one who gets customers subscribing first tends to be the one that keeps those customers. It is far more expensive to win away a customer from an existing supplier who is doing a good job than it is to acquire that customer in the first place. So a bit of a double jeopardy there from the perspective of IT vendors and distributors. Now, what does this all sort of boil down to? What lessons can we learn? How can these challenges from these four different stakeholder groups be addressed or mitigated? And I'm going to suggest that we can draw lessons from other industries. And really, to me, it all boils down to the transparency and visibility of alternatives. We have seen a number of examples. The more common ones are there, the more well-known ones are there, Airbnb, TripAdvisor, HomeAdvisor. These are really platforms that are disruptive tactics of the digital age that provide customers and all people, all participants, all stakeholder groups with the transparency and visibility of alternatives that they need to make intelligent choices and choices that have a higher probability of delivering successful outcomes all around. And I would argue that while research firms have been historically very good, and I'm not trying to in any way be negative towards research firms. I do research myself. But historically, I think, we have provided customers with far more insights into technology products, and very little actually in the way of real insights have been provided with respect to technology services. And I believe that there's a significant gap that exists for providing end customers and really all members of the value chain with the transparency and visibility of alternatives that they need to make intelligent choices and sound choices that deliver the business benefits and outcomes that all of them are seeking. And I would finally sort of suggest and argue that we are experiencing really a fundamental value chain reconfiguration. All of those four stakeholder groups are redefining who does what in terms of the delivery of digital transformation in this digital age. And I would suggest and argue that this value chain reconfiguration and the speed of that and the degree to which it is optimized really hinges on all of the stakeholders that I've mentioned having this level of transparency and visibility, transparency in terms of what alternatives are available and visibility into the nature of those alternatives. And so if that kind of transparency and visibility is not available, it seems to me at least that all of the stakeholders face material risk that the challenges that I've just described will continue to exist. And as a consequence, all of the stakeholder groups will fail to achieve the full promise of digital transformation, or at least, at the very least, be slower in the realization of the full promise of digital transformation than would be the case if there was if there were mechanisms for a greater level of transparency and visibility of alternatives for all of those stakeholder groups. So with that, I will pause. Thank you for your attention and be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dana. That was a great presentation. All the questions that I kept thinking of during your presentation, you pretty much answered as you were going along the presentation. So I definitely appreciate that intuitiveness on your side as a presenter. I'll just open it up. If there are any questions, Katya, TJ, if anything came up from either of you. Okay, doesn't sound like it, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. Thank you so much. Let's